Welcome to the Frankenpod, a podcast stitched together from the corpses of mystery, noir, and gothic literature and cinema. I'm Morgan, and this is another one of those solo Frankenpods that I do to fill the gaping void in the main episodes. These mini episodes reduce the literature tangents Brent has to put up with, and you can totally skip them too if you wish. In this episode, I'm going to introduce the myth of Prometheus, as it is so critical to Frankenstein or the modern-day Prometheus by Mary Shelley. Many of you who are familiar with the myth may have found it in the same way as I did, in those very dense omnibuses for children that retold stories of myth and legend. In the spirit of childlike wonder and sheer bald-faced laziness, I was going to retell the story of Prometheus in the same way I first read it, in a 1920s children adaption, very similar to the kind I used to read at my Nanna and Grandpa's house when I was a kid. But for some reason, I hadn't anticipated how woefully inaccurate this retelling would be. So instead, I'm going to try to break down the myth myself. Please bear in mind, I'm no Jason from Myths and Legends, so this could be pretty rough going. And also, I opted for modern rather than ancient history in high school, so I could tell you about the role of propaganda in World War II, but I had to double check whether Zeus or Jupiter was the Greek one. Like I said, this could be rough. Here we go. The creation of the universe had been rough, and the war between the Olympian gods and the Titans had been a pretty messy affair. It resulted in the Titans being imprisoned on Tartarus, which was kind of a realm below the underworld, if that makes sense. Prometheus and his brother Epithemius were two Titans who had been spared imprisonment as they didn't really get involved in the war. In fact, later versions of the myth have Prometheus engaged in a kind of espionage against the Titans, securing Zeus's victory. Zeus was an arsehole. A horny, narcissistic arsehole who rapes women and other female creatures throughout Greek mythology. When it comes to the Greek gods, he is the absolute worst. But he was also the king of the gods, so everyone was supposed to heed his every whim. Perhaps at this point, a more witty political satirist could make a poignant comparison to this in current global politics, but I could not possibly. Prometheus may have done Zeus a solid in the war, but he was far from being just an Olympian servant towing the line of the gods. Prometheus was still a Titan, and he had a project. Pottery. Well, kind of. Prometheus is credited with fashioning mankind out of clay. Some myths say it was him, some say it was a collaborative effort between the gods. Regardless of who made mankind, there they stood. And Prometheus and Epithemius set about attributing evolutionary edges to the animals of Earth. Leopards were given speed, tortoises were given shells, and if the Greeks had ever seen a platypus, they would have attributed their poisonous barbs as a gift of Epithemius and Prometheus. But when it came to mankind, there was nothing left. Prometheus was sure that without a gift, mankind would be eaten the first time they strayed too close to the forest, or went for an ill-advised paddle in the shark and jellyfish-infested waters. So Prometheus fashioned himself a torch, or picked a stalk of fennel, sources vary, and stole fire from Zeus's lightning. He gave the fire to mankind, and voila! Instant civilization. Zeus was not happy. Fire was for the gods, not Prometheus's night school pottery project. He was pissed, but not as pissed as he would be when Prometheus told mankind to stop giving the best meat and crops they had as a sacrifice to the gods. Prometheus was like, guys, you were getting a little carried away. Giving thanks to the gods is great, but not dying of starvation is even better. Mankind took Prometheus's advice and offered up offal, wrapped in something more appetizing to trick the gods. In an act of extreme overreaction, Zeus chained Prometheus to a rock and gave him a liver that would continually replenish, so that every day, for eternity, a vulture could come and feast on his liver, inflicting tremendous pain on the Titan, a pain that he would have to bear as punishment, all for helping humans lead a less shitty existence. But Zeus wasn't done. He then decided that two can play at this pottery game, and he decided to create a woman, the idea being that she would ruin everything. Yes, Zeus is the definition of the patriarchy. Anyway, this lady he fashioned from Earth is called Pandora. It's pretty widely thought that she was an unwitting participant in Zeus's shitty plan. Zeus, in the grand tradition of treating women as property, gives Pandora to Epithemius, Prometheus's brother, as a bride. Epithemius seems to be more than fine with this and is nowhere near as suspicious of Zeus as he should be, because, as I said, Zeus is the worst. Pandora didn't really have any belongings with her when she arrived at Epithemius's palace. Except this inconspicuous jar, a jar that she was told specifically not to open. And like a button with a sign that says do not push, or a piece of fruit that God says not to eat, temptation eventually gets the better of her and she opens the jar. Out of the jar explodes the sorrows of the world that mysteriously had not existed till this point. And after all those misfortunes floated away to plague mankind, all that was left in the jar to console mankind was hope. And that is very basically the story of Prometheus. He may or may not get rescued by Hercules or reconcile with Zeus later, but that is not particularly important to the story. At least not the story that we are telling right now. What is important is that both Prometheus and Victor Frankenstein are architects of creation that results in a creature that is affront to one deity or another. Both creature and creator suffer. Although I would argue that Prometheus is far more compassionate towards mankind than Victor is towards his creature. But I suppose Prometheus was a titan and Victor was just a mortal human doctor. What I find particularly interesting is that Mary Shelley has used a story in which the god in question is entirely unsympathetic and Zeus is entirely culpable in the suffering of the creature and his creator. Interesting, especially when we consider that Mary Shelley's partner, Percy Shelley, was kicked out of at least one university for highly controversial atheist beliefs. These beliefs, which were antithetical to respectable English society at the time, were an exciting point of discussion in the literary circles that both Mary and Percy ran in. Okay, that's it for this week. I might be back next week to talk about the life and times of Our Lady of Science Fiction, Mary Godwin Shelley, or we might not be back until the 13th of February to talk about Dorian Gray. It's all improvised jazz until we work out what we're capable of. Check us out at thefrankenpod.wordpress.com for all the usual bits and bobs. And follow us on Twitter at thefrankenpod for all the silly vintage gifts your heart desires. Bye!